Eleanor Voss walked into Owen Calloway's garage on $1,000 heels and the smile of someone who had already won. Inside was the smell of motor oil, the yellow wash of fluorescent lights, and a man wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. She looked around, peeling walls, a corroded tin roof, a toolbox with a broken latch, and she laughed. "How much is this pile of scrap worth, Mr. Calloway?" she asked, as if the answer were obvious. She did not know what was waiting behind the steel door at the back of that room. Keep watching. What Owen Calloway kept locked behind that door was about to change everything Eleanor Voss thought she owned. The Maplewood neighborhood had been disappearing for the better part of 2 years, one lot at a time, until what remained looked less like a community and more like a mouth with most of its teeth pulled. Orange construction fencing stretched along 3 sides of the block, and beyond that fencing the old frame houses and corner shops were already gone, cleared to bare dirt and marked with survey stakes. Where the Hendersons had once grown tomatoes in their side yard, there was now a concrete foundation. Where the dry cleaner on the corner had stood for 40 years, there was nothing but a rectangle of fresh gravel, and in the middle of all that emptiness, exactly where it had always been, sat Owen Calloway's garage. Owen opened the roll-up door at 6:45 every morning, the same way he had opened it for 11 years. He was 41, broad through the shoulders, with hands that told you more about his life than any resume could, knuckles scarred from close work, palms roughened by 1,000 hours of grip, a permanent crescent of grease under the nail of his right thumb that no amount of soap fully removed. His hair had gone salt and pepper earlier than it should have, and his face was the kind that didn't give much away. He had chosen Maplewood deliberately, a dozen years ago, for the same reason most people had. It was a neighborhood that asked no questions and offered no pretensions. A working-class block where a man could open a garage and be left alone to do what he was good at. He had no particular interest in being known for anything beyond the quality of the work. 3 former employees had called him in the past month after hearing the news about Voss Capital's expansion plans, offering to come back and help him fight. He'd thanked each of them and told them no. He wasn't interested in dragging anyone else into whatever was coming. From the street, the garage looked exactly like what Eleanor Voss would later call it. The cinder block exterior was flaking along the south wall, the tin roof had a rust line above the second bay, and the sign reading Calloway Auto had lost its final letter at some point and no one had replaced it. Inside the front section were 2 bays, a lift, a tool chest, and enough work to keep one man busy. Owen handled everything himself now. Oil changes, diagnostics on older domestics that the dealerships wouldn't touch because the labor margins weren't worth their time. His customers drove 20 minutes out of their way to reach him because he was the kind of mechanic who fixed the actual problem on the first try. But at the back of the garage, separated from the working bays by a wall of drywall and a steel door with 2 deadbolts, there was another room entirely. No one in Maplewood had ever seen the inside of it. The few customers who asked were told it was storage. That seemed to satisfy them. A folded notice had been taped to the roll-up door when Owen arrived that morning, a printed announcement from Voss Capital Ventures about a community meeting the following Friday, to be held at the Maplewood Civic Hall, the subject line reading Neighborhood Development Information Session. Owen read it once, creased it along its original folds, and slid it into the back pocket of his jeans. He was under a customer's Jeep Cherokee by 7:15. The call came at 9:30. Isaac Drummond, Voss Capital's general counsel, introduced himself with the polished efficiency of someone who had performed this particular task many thousands of times. He said he understood Mr. Calloway had received prior correspondence, that the company valued good faith dialogue, and that he would like to arrange a private meeting before Friday's session to explore what he called alignment opportunities. Owen asked him directly. "You want to buy the garage?" Isaac confirmed. Owen said he would be at the meeting on Friday and ended the call. He put the phone face down on the tool chest and went back to work. That evening, after the last customer had collected their car and the front bays were empty, Owen stood at the steel door for a long moment. He didn't open it. He stood there with his hand on the deadbolt, the way a man stands before something he has carried for a long time without ever quite setting down. Then he turned off the fluorescent lights, walked out the side door, and locked up for the night. The construction crews packed up at 5, and in the hours between dusk and dawn, Maplewood was still the place it used to be, if you didn't look too carefully at the gaps where the houses had been. In the 41st floor office of Voss Capital Ventures, the entire Maplewood block was rendered in a three-dimensional site model that rotated slowly on the conference table's display screen. 34 acquisition agreements had been signed and filed. On the screen, 34 parcels glowed green. One narrow rectangle at the center of the block where the garage sat glowed red. Isaac stood at the table with a legal pad and reported that direct mail, 2 attorney letters, and a personal visit from a junior acquisitions associate had all been declined without counter offer. Eleanor Voss listened without changing her expression. She drummed 2 fingers on the table once, then told Isaac she would go herself. Eleanor arrived at the garage on a Tuesday morning in a black Escalade. She stepped onto the cracked sidewalk in a charcoal blazer and slacks, gold-framed glasses, a phone in her left hand that she did not put away. She looked at the building for a moment from the curb. The way an architect looks at a structure they intend to demolish, then walked toward the door without knocking. Isaac followed, 2 steps behind. Owen was at the rear of the front bay, had heard the car pull up, and was already watching when Eleanor stepped inside. He was wiping his hands on a shop towel. He didn't move to greet her. Eleanor introduced herself briefly. Owen nodded. She said that Voss Capital was prepared to offer $480,000 for the property, which represented 18% above the current market valuation for the parcel. Owen listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said, "It's not for sale." He said it the way people say things they have already made peace with, not aggressively, not defensively, just as a settled fact. Eleanor smiled. She was very good at absorbing that particular kind of answer and converting it into a negotiating position. She moved deeper into the garage without being invited, looked at the walls, the equipment, the 2 vehicles in the bays. Her expression was the kind of composed neutrality that took years to perfect and meant nothing in particular. She said she understood his attachment to the property, but that the surrounding parcels were already committed, the timeline was fixed, the financing was in place. She said that being the last holdout in a project of this scale was not a position of strength. Owen asked her if she'd like to see what he was working on, nodded toward the Jeep on the lift, and said nothing more about what she had told him. It was when Eleanor turned toward the back of the garage that her composure shifted slightly. The steel door was flush with the wall, painted gray, equipped with 2 keyed deadbolts rather than 1. She walked to it and put her hand on the handle. Locked, she looked at Owen. "What's back there?" Owen didn't look up from the workbench. "Old stuff," he said. She tried the handle once more, as if expecting a different result, then let go. Isaac, standing behind her, studied Owen's face for any tell. There was none. Eleanor set her business card on the corner of the tool chest on her way out. She said the offer would be raised to $550,000, that this was the final figure she would bring to him directly, and that she hoped he would give it serious consideration. Owen picked up the card. He looked at it. He set it back down in exactly the same spot where she had placed it. Eleanor was already at the door. She didn't look back. In the Escalade, Eleanor told Isaac to pull everything available on Owen Calloway, property tax records, code compliance history, outstanding liens, contractor licensing, anything the city inspector's office might have flagged. She said it without urgency, the way you name a task you have already decided is necessary. Isaac typed on his phone. The car moved through the construction zone at the edge of the block, and Eleanor watched the cleared ground through the window, all that bare, ready earth, and thought about the single red square sitting at the center of her map. That night, after the last vehicle left the lot, Owen opened the steel door. He stood for a moment in the dark before reaching for the switch. The lights came up slowly, LEDs, tuned to a specific color temperature designed for a specific kind of work. Owen walked the perimeter of the room once without stopping. Then he came back, turned out the lights, and locked both deadbolts behind him. He drove home in the 11-year-old pickup he had owned since before his wife died. 2 days after Eleanor's visit, a pair of city inspectors arrived at the garage at 8 in the morning. Owen had just finished an oil change and was wiping down the bay floor when they knocked on the open roll-up door and showed their credentials. They spent 40 minutes in the front section with clipboards and a moisture reader, testing the electrical panel, measuring the clearance under the mezzanine shelf, tapping the concrete floor when they left. They handed Owen a printed notice listing 5 compliance deficiencies. Outdated electrical subpanel, roof insulation below current fire resistance standards, a surface crack in the floor slab exceeding half an inch, inadequate ventilation coefficient in the rear section, and a drainage slope issue in Bay 2. Owen read the document from top to bottom. He signed the receipt copy. He thanked them and showed them out. The formal notice arrived by certified mail the following afternoon, on Voss Capital's retained law firm letterhead with Isaac's signature at the bottom. The letter cited the inspection findings and noted that under municipal code, failure to remedy all listed deficiencies within 30 days would constitute grounds for a mandatory closure order. The second-to-last paragraph noted that in the event of closure, the city's Economic Development Review Board retained discretionary authority to initiate eminent domain proceedings on commercial properties within designated redevelopment corridors. Owen read that paragraph twice. He folded the letter and put it in the drawer with the inspection notice. Then he made one phone call that had nothing to do with inspectors or lawyers. He dialed a number from memory, and when the man on the other end picked up, Owen skipped any preamble. "Jason, you still looking for the 427? There was silence on the line for a beat longer than usual, not the silence of confusion, but of someone recalibrating. Jason Merritt, speaking from his office in Pasadena, asked in a voice that had gone very quiet. "You found it," Owen said. "I need you in Maplewood on Friday morning. 10 o'clock. He gave the address and hung up before Jason could ask anything more. Cameron Holt came by on Thursday afternoon with a notepad and a recorder. He was 35, wrote for a regional paper called the Maplewood Chronicle, and had spent 4 months building a series on the displacement patterns created by large-scale commercial acquisition across 6 neighborhoods in the county. He had interviewed 12 former Maplewood residents, 3 city council members, and 2 of Eleanor's previous acquisition targets in other districts. He told Owen all of this and asked if he was willing to comment on the Voss Capital situation. Owen said he appreciated the work but had nothing to say about Voss Capital at the moment. Cameron asked if that was a permanent no or a temporary one. "Come by Friday morning at 10. If you want a real story, that's when I'll have one." He held Cameron's card in his fingers for a moment after the reporter left, then set it on the corner of the tool chest, not in the same spot where Eleanor's card had been. He noted the difference himself. On Thursday evening, Grace Whitfield stopped by. She was 67, had run the laundromat 3 doors down for most of her adult life, and had been the last other resident business owner to hold out for any length of time. She stood in the doorway of the garage with her coat on, not coming in, and told Owen she had signed that afternoon. Her voice was steady. She said she had gotten a fair price, and that she was going to her daughter's place in Raleigh, and that she thought it was time. Owen said she had done right. He meant it. She looked at him the way people look at someone they are not sure they will see again, then said goodnight and walked down the sidewalk. Owen watched her go until she turned the corner. He stayed at the garage until close to midnight. He opened the steel door and left it ajar. From outside, all anyone could have seen was the light, a warm amber rectangle cut into the back wall of the building, with the shadow of a man moving through it twice. Then the light went out and the night was quiet. Isaac called Eleanor at 11:15 to confirm that the compliance clock was officially running. 30 days. Eleanor asked whether Owen had made any contact with the city attorney's office. Isaac said no. She said, "He'll come around before Friday." She sounded certain she had learned, over many years and many transactions, to read the moment when resistance became acceptance, the point at which people stopped arguing terms and started negotiating exit. She believed Owen Calloway had already crossed that line. She was calculating on incomplete information. She did not know that yet. The Maplewood Civic Hall seated around 120, and by 7 o'clock on Friday evening it held something close to that number. The crowd was mixed. Former residents who had already signed and sold, a handful of current business owners from the surrounding blocks, 3 members of the city council, 2 aldermanic aides, several reporters, and a cluster of Voss Capital's financial partners, recognizable by their suits. Cameron Holt sat in the 3rd row with a notebook open and a pen already moving. A large projection screen at the front of the room displayed a rotating three-dimensional rendering of the proposed development: tower glass, a restaurant promenade, an underground parking structure, a rooftop terrace, all of it luminous and smooth and architecturally precise. A name curved across the base of the rendering in clean sans serif type: Voss Mapla Wood Center. Eleanor Voss presented with the practiced ease of someone who had given this exact presentation in rooms very much like this one, enough times that the performance had become invisible. She moved through the figures clearly and without hesitation. A $200 million investment, 1,200 construction jobs, 450 permanent positions once the development opened, an estimated $4.5 million in annual municipal tax revenue. She discussed green building certification, community access plazas, and a public art fund seeded at $500,000. She thanked the residents who had participated in the acquisition process. She called the project a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the neighborhood. When she finished, the room gave her measured, genuine applause. The questions from the floor were mostly procedural: traffic studies, phasing schedules, the relocation assistance program for tenants who had been renting rather than owning. Eleanor handled each one smoothly, deferring to Isaac where specific figures were needed. Then a man near the back of the hall raised his hand and asked, in a voice that was not unfriendly, about the one parcel not yet under agreement, the garage on the south end of the block. Eleanor turned to face the question with a composed smile. She said that Voss Capital had made every good faith effort to reach a mutually agreeable arrangement with the property owner in question, and that regrettably some individuals found it difficult to move forward when they were very attached to what things had once been. She said it gently, with a brief pause at the end that left just enough space for the light laughter that followed. Owen Calloway was sitting in a folding chair in the back row, third from the end. He was wearing a dark flannel shirt and clean jeans and had brought nothing with him: no notes, no folder, no phone on the table in front of him. When the laughter settled, he raised his hand and stood. Eleanor recognized him and gave a small nod. "I have a few questions about the eminent domain procedure," he said. His voice was level and carried clearly without the microphone. "Specifically about the classification threshold for commercial properties within a designated redevelopment corridor." Isaac's pen stopped moving. Owen asked 3 questions. The first was about the statutory timeline between a mandatory closure notice and an eminent domain referral under the municipal code cited in his compliance letter. The second was about the evidentiary standard required for the review board to approve a redevelopment classification on a commercially operating property with no prior ownership disputes. The third was about whether the inspection report triggering the compliance notice had been independently verified or filed through the Development Authority's affiliated review office. Each question was precise, each question was correct. He asked them with the measured patience of someone who had already done the research and was now, for the record, asking out loud. Eleanor answered the first 2 with measured confidence, but on the third her answer ran slightly longer than it needed to, and Isaac looked down at his legal pad and did not look back up. Eleanor moved back to the larger ground. She addressed the room, not Owen, when she continued. She said she understood it was difficult for some people to see change coming to a neighborhood they had known for a long time, and that Voss Capital had been at every step, operating within every legal and ethical framework available. She looked at Owen when she said the next part. She said, "With all due respect, Mr. Calloway, you are operating a deteriorating structure on a parcel valued at under $500,000. What Voss Capital is proposing to bring to this community has real value that cannot be held hostage by one building that, frankly, has more in common with a salvage yard than a functioning business." Isaac stood and moved to the front of the room. He clicked to a new slide, a scanned copy of Owen's compliance notice, enlarged and annotated in red, projected on the screen for the full room to read. He walked through each of the 5 deficiencies with brisk, lawyerly precision and concluded by noting that from a municipal code perspective, the structure in its current state was technically ineligible for continued commercial operation. He used the phrase scrap metal value, not cruelly but matter-of-factly, like a man reading a line item from an actuarial table. Someone near the front of the hall made a soft sound that might have been agreement. Owen Calloway sat down. He He did not look embarrassed. He sat down slowly, the way a man sits when he knows something the rest of the room doesn't, and he looked at the projection screen with an expression that Cameron Holt would later describe in print as almost amused. Eleanor watched him from the front of the room and decided the expression meant resignation. She was wrong about that. After the meeting adjourned and Eleanor was shaking hands with the council members near the door, Cameron Holt intercepted Owen in the side corridor. He asked what the 3 questions had been about. Owen looked at him for a moment, then said, "Come to the garage tomorrow morning." 10 o'clock, he walked out into the night. Cameron stood in the corridor for a moment with his pen in his hand, looking after him, then wrote a single line in his notebook and circled it twice. Cameron Holt arrived at 9:58. He parked on the street and saw a silver SUV with California plates already at the curb, a man, sitting in the driver's seat, not on his phone, just watching the garage with an expression that was difficult to name. Cameron walked past him, nodded. The man nodded back but didn't speak. Owen opened the side door before Cameron knocked inside. The front bays were as they always were, the lift, the tool chest, a sedan on jackstands awaiting a brake job. Owen poured 3 cups of coffee and carried 2 of them to the entrance, then leaned out to wave at the man in the California SUV. The man got out of the car and came inside. He was 58, lean, gray-haired, with a collector's habit of looking at anything mechanical the way other people look at art. He introduced himself as Jason Merritt. He and Owen shook hands without excessive greeting. It was clear they had known each other for a long time in the way that people who have worked at the same high level of something technical tend to know each other, not with warmth exactly, but with a kind of mutual fluency. Owen finished his coffee without explaining anything. He said simply, "Come on," and walked toward the back of the garage. Cameron followed. Jason followed Cameron. They passed the tool chests and the lift, reached the end of the second bay, and stopped in front of the steel door. Owen took a key from his front pocket, an old brass key on a plain ring, fit it to the upper lock. Then the lower, he pushed the door open and reached inside. The lights came on, not the yellow hum of fluorescent tubes, but clean, cold LED arrays hung in 2 rows from a ceiling that was, in contrast to everything on the other side of the wall, insulated and finished and precisely maintained. The floor was smooth epoxy, a neutral gray beige. The walls were lined with perforated steel panels. A dehumidifier ran quietly in the far corner, and the air in the room was different from the air in the rest of the building. Drier, cooler. Still, Cameron stepped inside and stopped. Jason stepped inside and stopped. There were 4 automobiles. They were arranged with the careful spacing of objects that have been placed to be seen, not stored. No tarps, no oil drips on the floor beneath them. Their paint surfaces caught the LED light the way glass catches morning sun, with a clarity that did not seem like something that should exist outside of a museum. The first car was positioned at the front left of the room. It was a 1967 Shelby GT500 in Brittany blue, with twin white racing stripes running hood to tail, chrome side pipes, and an engine that, even standing still, seemed to take up more space than physics should have allowed. Jason walked directly to it without looking at anything else. He crouched at the driver's door and looked at the VIN plate through the glass. He stood up. He walked around the front. He crouched again at the passenger side and examined the door jamb data tag for a long moment. He stood up and looked at Owen. He did not say anything for almost 20 seconds. Then he said, "This is the Gainesville car," Owen said. Jason's voice, when he continued, had changed register, quieter, more careful. "It's been missing since 1971, Owen said. "I know." The second car was a 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona in original unrestored condition. One of roughly 70 remaining examples in the world, the famous aerodynamic nose cone and rear wing intact, the paint a deep red that had oxidized over decades to something richer than its original formula. The third was a 1970 Plymouth Cuda 446 pack in Torred 4-speed manual, with the original window sticker still tucked in the glove box and a factory build sheet folded beneath the driver's seat. Each car had documentation, not photocopied, not reconstructed, but original paper. Window stickers, broadcast sheets, dealer invoices, title chains going back to the year of manufacture. Owen kept the papers in archival quality folders in a fireproof cabinet bolted to the wall near the dehumidifier. The fourth car stood at the back of the room, and it was different in kind from the others. It was lower, wider, shaped by engineering rather than period design fashion. Its body panels formed from materials that were not available to the public in the year it was built. There was no exterior badging, no manufacturer's logo, no trim concession to aesthetics that did not serve a structural purpose. The proportions were wrong in the way that purpose-built things are always wrong to eyes trained on. Production cars too aggressive, too stripped, too clearly designed by someone who cared only about what happened when the engine was running. The cooling vents along the rear quarter panels were precisely sized and precisely placed. The diffuser underneath the tail section was not decorative. Someone had spent a long time thinking about every surface of this vehicle, and that thinking was visible in every line of it. Along the sill on the driver's side in small stamped letters, Hargrove Apexar Pro 2. Cameron read the letters and looked at Owen. "You worked at Hargrove Motorsport," he said. It was not quite a question. Owen went to the cabinet and returned with a manila folder. Inside were a copy of his engineering license, a Hargrove Motorsport employee identification card, 4 photographs of him standing in a facility that was clearly not a Maplewood garage, a large, bright engineering floor, monitors and fabrication equipment and cars in various states of assembly, and a set of technical drawings, each signed at the lower right corner, Owen Callaway, lead powertrain engineer, Hargrove Motorsport. The dates ran from 2003 through 2014. Cameron looked at the drawings. He looked at the 4th car, he looked at Owen. Owen told it the way he told most things, plainly, without embellishment. He had led the powertrain team at Hargrove for 11 years. He had been good at it in the particular way that people are good at things they also love, not performing competence but embodying it, so that the distinction between the work and the person doing it gradually disappeared. His wife had gotten sick in 2013. She died in the spring of 2014. After that, he could not go back, not to the facility, not to the work, not to any version of the life that had been built around her being in it. He had taken what he was contractually entitled to. The Apex prototype had been a personal side project, built on his own time with his own design specifications, and his employment contract was explicit on the point of ownership for off-clock engineering work. The 3 classic cars he had found over the years the way some men find their way back to something slowly, one at a time, never rushing because there was no deadline and no destination, just the work itself. He had hunted the Shelby for 6 years before locating it through a probate filing in rural Georgia. He had paid for the Daytona with money he had been saving since he was 26. Jason Merritt was already on his phone. He stood near the Shelby and spoke for 3 minutes to someone at the Barrett-Jackson auction, organization's consignment office in Scottsdale. He spoke quietly and with the calm authority of a man who had placed calls like this before, but his free hand rested on the Shelby's roof the entire time, lightly, the way you rest a hand on something you are not sure is real. When he hung up, he looked at Owen and said, "The Shelby and the Apex alone, conservative estimate. Floor of the market, they're looking at $4.5 million. With what the Apex represents historically, the ceiling is open. There are 2 or 3 private collectors who have been trying to locate a Hargrove prototype for the better part of a decade. The moment this goes public, the phones will not stop." He paused. "All 4 cars together, good auction cycle, you're looking at somewhere between $6.5 and $8 million. Minimum." The room was quiet except for the hum of the dehumidifier. Cameron Holt set his notebook down on the file cabinet, picked it back up, and wrote 1 line. Owen stood with his hands at his sides and said nothing. "So Eleanor Voss stood up in front of that whole room," Cameron said slowly, "and called all of this scrap metal." Owen looked at him steadily. "You can write that," he said. Before they left the room, Owen walked to the far wall and stopped at a small framed photograph hanging just above eye level. 4 inches by 6, plain black frame. A woman in her mid-30s sitting on the hood of the Shelby, laughing at something off camera. The car behind her was in working condition but not yet fully restored. Masking paper strips ran along the door seams. "She looked completely at ease, my wife," Owen said. He said nothing else. He turned off the lights and they walked out. The article ran on Monday morning under Cameron Holt's byline in the Maplewood Chronicle, with a digital syndication pickup that had not been part of anyone's plan. The headline read, "Inside the garage Eleanor Voss called scrap metal." The piece ran 2,200 words, included 3 photographs. the exterior of the garage, the 4 cars under the LED lights, and a close-up of the Hargrove Apex R prototype plate. Jason Merritt was quoted providing the auction valuation estimates. Eleanor Voss's remarks from the community meeting verbatim from Cameron's recording appeared in the 4th paragraph. By 2 in the afternoon, the article had been republished by 4 automotive news platforms, 2 regional business journals, and a national finance outlet's daily briefing. The collector car community, which is small and pays extremely close attention, had been discussing it since 9 that morning. By the time Eleanor arrived at her office at 8:30, Isaac had already cataloged 14 missed calls on the main acquisitions line. 2 were from Voss Capital's largest institutional investor. 1 was from a partner at the construction financing firm. 3 were from reporters. 1 was from a city council member's chief of staff, requesting a call at her earliest convenience regarding procedural questions related to the Maplewood acquisition timeline. Eleanor stood at her office window with her coffee going cold in her hand and listened to Isaac read through the messages in order. She told him to start with the institutional investor. The following morning, Cameron forwarded to the City Council's Oversight Committee documentation obtained through a public records request filed 3 weeks earlier. The internal processing timestamps on Owen's compliance inspection report. The report had been submitted to the city's inspection scheduling office 48 hours after Owen declined Eleanor's $550,000 offer. The committee's standard processing queue for non-emergency commercial inspections ran at approximately 11 business days. Owen's inspection had been moved to priority status by a request logged under the Development Authority's liaison account, a procedural option that existed for health and safety emergencies, not for general code enforcement. Isaac's name did not appear on the request. But the liaison account was registered to a firm that Voss Capital had retained for permit facilitation services. Eleanor called Owen herself on Wednesday morning, no intermediary, no assistant on the line first. Owen picked up and waited. She said she wanted to discuss a revised arrangement. Voss Capital was now prepared to offer $1.2 million for the garage property, more than double the last figure. She said this reflected a more accurate assessment of the property's strategic value. Owen listened without interrupting, and when she was done, he said, "I'm not selling the garage, miss." Voss Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she asked with a directness that surprised even her what it was that he actually wanted. Owen said 3 things. First, the 3 eastern parcels on the Maplewood block that you have acquired but have not broken ground on yet. Sell them back to the Community Land Trust at your original acquisition cost, no markup. Second, withdraw the compliance notice and the associated eminent domain language officially through the city attorney's office. Third, a public statement, not a press release, a statement with your name on it, acknowledging that the acquisition process in Maplewood caused harm to longtime residents who deserved better than what they received. He said nothing else. He waited. The silence on the line lasted 15 seconds. Eleanor said she would have her team review the requests and respond through appropriate channels. Owen said that was fine and ended the call. What followed was not a dramatic capitulation. It took 3 days of back-channel communication, 2 calls between Eleanor's attorneys and the city's legal staff, and 1 conversation between Eleanor and the managing director of Voss Capital's primary investment fund, a conversation in which the managing director said, without ambiguity, that the fund's due diligence requirements for ongoing participation in the project required any outstanding reputational or regulatory exposure to be resolved before the next financing draw. Isaac argued against all 3 of Owen's conditions. Eleanor overruled him on each one. Voss Capital issued a formal withdrawal of the compliance enforcement notice on Thursday, citing a procedural review that had identified irregularities in the inspection prioritization process. The same day, the company executed transfer agreements on the 3 eastern parcels to the Maplewood Community Land Trust at the original acquisition cost, a total of $940,000 below current market value. Eleanor Voss appeared at a brief press availability outside the Civic Hall on Friday afternoon and read a prepared statement acknowledging that the development project had failed to adequately honor the history and the people of the Maplewood neighborhood, and that the company was committed to a revised community engagement framework going forward. She answered 2 questions and then left. Her expression gave nothing away. She was very good at that. The construction on the Voss Maplewood Center began the following month, on schedule. The towers went up on the western parcels as designed. The restaurant Promenade opened 14 months later, and on the south end of the block, between the new glass and steel corner entrance to the development and the edge of the Eastern Land Trust parcels, Owen Calloway's garage stood exactly where it had always stood. He had repainted the exterior the same flat gray as before, just fresh. He had fixed the sign so that it read Calloway Auto again, all 4 letters of the last name intact and accounted for. He had not upgraded the lighting in the front bays or replaced the tin roof or done anything that might make the building look like it was trying to compete with its new neighbors. The garage looked the same as it always had, and the people who walked past it on their way into the Voss Maplewood development did so without knowing what was behind the steel door at the back. Owen had no interest in telling them. That was entirely the point. Jason Merritt came back to Maplewood 6 weeks after the article ran. He and Owen sat in the front bay with the roll-up door open and the fall air moving through, and Jason laid out what he was calling a proposal. He had a consignment slot at the Barrett-Jackson Scottsdale auction in January. He thought the Daytona was the right car to run first, strong provenance, strong documentation. The market was paying a premium for original unrestored examples that cycle. Owen could keep the Shelby, keep the Apex, keep the Cuda for now, start with one, see how it moved. Owen looked at the proposal documents for a long moment without speaking. Then he said the Daytona made sense. They shook hands across the corner of the tool chest. It was the first business decision Owen had made about the cars since the year his wife died. It felt, he would later admit to no one in particular, like exactly the right speed. That evening Owen sat alone in the back room with the overhead lights on their lowest setting, warm amber he preferred when he was not working. The Shelby was in front of him, the Apex was to his left. He didn't work on anything. He didn't make calls. He sat in the chair he had owned for 15 years and looked at the cars, and at the photograph on the wall, and at the light on the paint, and at all the time that had moved through this room without anyone outside it knowing what was in here. Eleanor Voss had stood 40 feet from this door and called it a salvage yard. She had stood in front of 100 people and said the words out loud. And Owen had sat in a folding chair and listened, and the thing he had felt was not anger. It was closer to patience, the patience of a man who has been waiting a long time for something to become clear, and who could see in that moment that it was finally about to. The garage had never been scrap metal. It had only ever been something that Eleanor Voss did not have the equipment to see.